as it relates to your off season, how much of this was blueprint compared to like just reacting to what ended up happening? Like, in other words, do you go in with your 15 plays scripted and then run it, or do you wait to see what the defense is lined up and to make your calls and executions aside?
Mm-hmm. Well, you definitely go in with a blueprint of, I think free agency is a time to address needs, right? And so you definitely go in with a blueprint of, all right, these are some of the specific needs we want to address. In terms of like, to answer your question more specifically, in terms of like scripting the top 15 plays, like, and scripting the top 15 players, right? That doesn't necessarily remain as clear because there's a market, right? And there's values on different players, and that market kind of can ebb and flow depending on buyers and sellers and all those different types of things. And so while you do go in and you have a certain focus on like certain players, because you do attach value to players, so you have you think you have an idea of, okay, these players are going to be in this price range, these players are going to be in this price range, so on and so forth. And so you have an idea of there are certain players that I think you prioritize, but it's fluid because you really just don't know where the market's going to go in that regard. Was
Chandler Jones obviously a priority, and did that happen before you knew about Davante, or were they unto themselves?
They were unto themselves, but I would say Chandler, was he a priority? Well, yeah, he's one of the best pass rushers available, and so anytime, like, those are premium positions, so I think you need to do your work on those premium positions. And so again, didn't know how, that was one we didn't know how that was just going to materialize, how the market was going to materialize. There was obviously we had moved Yannick, and so there was the opportunity to add another, to add the pass rusher, and there was that dynamic too. And so so to answer your question, I mean, yes, he was one of the players that we were highly interested in, just didn't know how that one was going to go and how it was going to kind of fall out.
But it obviously worked out. I mean, at what point did it, like, okay, this is real?
Yeah, I mean, once you get into the negotiation process with an agent, and once you can find some common ground, that's when those possibilities become a little bit more, I would say, real. Because you can call someone and they say, hey, we're at this price point and you're not, and then the deal kind of starts and ends really quickly. And so there was some common ground there, and there was interest on both sides, and so we were able to get it done.
So those two weren't linked, Yannick and Chandler. Can you look at it from the first reaction, like, oh, they got Chandler and they had to move Yannick? That was like the first thing was going on, but maybe that wasn't the case.
Yeah, well, it just made, like, once we added Chandler, I forget exactly, I don't even know how they were reported specifically.
Chandler, then unique.
Okay, Chandler. Once we added Chandler, obviously, then there's you only have so many snaps, right? Chandler, Yannick, Crosby, and so it just made that opportunity a little bit more reasonable to make that move, once we had Chandler.
Was Yassin somebody that you guys had sort of had an eye on from afar?
Yeah, I think I had mentioned it in a couple of the interviews that I had done. Is Yassin was a guy that I did some work on in New England before the draft, and went out to Temple and spent time with him there, and really got to know, I'd say, the person and the football, the person in terms of personality, but then also like the football intelligence piece, and just got to know the player. And so we liked him coming out. We've watched him from afar, watched him develop, watched him grow, and he's still a young ascending player. And so anytime you can get a young ascending player, especially at that another premium position, like you can never have too many corners, too many guys that can cover. That was an attractive piece to that for us.
How did the whole Davante thing come together? Because it seemed like it just came out of nowhere, like a lightning bolt, and obviously it didn't.
Yeah.
Likes to hear that, I'm
sure. Yeah. I forget, it was right there at the beginning of free agency. Yeah. I forget the actual day and time and all that. It does really blend together, but at the beginning of that week, again, like, he was a free agent. He did get tagged, right? But so, like, you're doing, again, we watch, like I mentioned at the beginning, while you pare it down, like, we evaluate every free agent. Every single UFA, every single RFA, like, that's a part of our process that starts in like October, and so we evaluate all of these players, and we have an idea of, the talent level and the skill. And so, once we had an idea, and for my job, just to go back, my job is to stay in contact with all the teams, like my group, whether it's, Dwayne Joseph, Champ Kelly, our pro scouts, we're constantly in touch with teams around the league, who's available, where's a need, where's a surplus, all those different things. That's just part of the scouting process. And so, within that process, and you inquire about players too. You know what I mean? So you may ask, hey, is player X available? Is player, Z available? Those are some of the typical conversations that you have as you work through your scouting process, and kind of going through that process, it came to fruition that he may be available, and we started to go down that path, and then,
Was he an exclusive rights franchise tag or a non, where you could have?
The way that he was is you could have put it on an offer sheet for him.
Got it.
And if you agree to that, you lose 2 ones.
Right. Okay.
So there's a trade-off for doing that.
And they could have always matched it.
And then they could have matched it.
Right.
Yeah.
As far as the actual trade, how do you weigh like the value of draft picks versus like a proven player? Is that a tough thing for you to weigh? Or like what kind of variables do you like put down on your board, or pros and cons, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, without going into too much detail, there's a lot of, I just say that, like the pros and cons, like understanding when you're going to, and this is for any trade, but understanding when you're going to acquire a player and you're going to give up draft picks, like what's the ramifications for that, right? Not just this coming year, but in future years too. And so that was a huge part of the consideration process. At the end of the day, to add a player as talented as Davante Adams is, with like a long body of work, right? This isn't a player that's been good for 2 years. Right. This is a player that's been at the top of his game for a long time. And then when you learn about the player, you start to understand why he's been at the top of his game for a long time. Highly competitive, high level work ethic, just very dedicated to being great every day, like practice. I mean, this guy, as the stories go, this guy goes as hard as anybody on a day-to-day basis in practice. And so when you kind of, a great player, great person, great work ethic, then you're starting to weigh the picks. I mean, there's a lot of different conversations that go into it, but at the end of the day, we felt like adding that high caliber of a player and person to our organization was worth the cost.
How much also though is that of you guys looking at yourself and saying, okay, we have a window here to be able to maybe sacrifice some long range with your draft picks for an impact player right now? I think I saw where 8 teams have traded out for the first round to go get players, impact players for right now. Is part of that though being able to be honest with yourself to say, we're in this window here, and so this is a trade that makes a lot of sense for us in terms of the timing as well?
Yeah. To be honest with you, I didn't ever think of the window. I didn't think of it that way. I guess because when you're in this role, right, you're always kind of looking short term, but there's always this long-term perspective on everything and team building and things like that. And so to just be on the job since, I don't know, whatever that was, February 1st, I haven't thought about this as like, okay, I have this small window. Right. I'm more of, I have this mindset of I'm just getting started. And it was an opportunity, again, it was an opportunity to add a great player. It was less about the window and more about just the player and the skill set and adding that type of talent to our team.
How did you feel about the domino effect that it kind of created with Tyreek Hill leaving the Chiefs heading out?
Yeah, I mean, I've read that was part of it. I don't really know what went into their decision-making process. I obviously am not in their building, so I don't know. I don't know if that was how that impacted their decision. Not seeing Tyreek Hill twice a year, though he's still in the AFC, unfortunately, there's nothing bad about not having to see him. He's a very talented player, so the Dolphins got a great player, and yeah, it was interesting how that all went down. I know from a fan perspective and things like that, whether it was tied together, I mean, I'm not sure.
Josh talked today a little bit about finding the sweet spot in negotiations with Derek for the extension, and then I don't even know how to take it, but Derek's agent, Tim Younger, tweeted out and kind of said, well, teams are always going to say those kinds of things, but we still have no comment on this. Where are you guys at right now in that trying to find that sweet spot with Derek?
Well, I first would say in the sweet spot, like that buzzword. I mean, that's really important in every contract negotiation because that's how they get done. As far as the contract negotiations with Derek or with any player, here's what I would say about that, and I do mean this, is that those are really they are really personal. They're personal things, right? They're personal to the player. They're personal to their families. They're personal for the organization. And we've all probably been through different contract negotiations ourselves. So for me, I think those really are things that the way that I'm going to handle those things here and going forward is keeping those in-house, keeping those discussions between myself and Tim and Derek. And I just think that's the right way to do business. I think that's the appropriate and most respectful way to do business. I've known Tim for a long time. Tim's a good agent. He's a good person. I've always enjoyed working with Tim. And so, we'll keep hammering away and keep working together, whether it's Tim or with any other agent. But I do think I think the best practice is to keep those things in house and just continue to work through them.
Do you guys? I mean, when you look at your time in New England, Tom Brady did take discounts, I guess you could call it, in order to leave room to build around him. Does that shape a philosophy for you guys at all, or is it completely different? Like you don't expect guys to always do that?
Yeah, I don't think you can expect guys to always do that.
Right. Definitely.
But
yet he did.
He did, and I would say I wasn't involved in all those. I wasn't involved in that at all during my time in New England, so I don't really know what the dynamics of that were and what those conversations were. So it would be irresponsible for me to, act like I did. But I think every individual, every player has their own process that they want to go through, and I think to expect someone to do something.
Thank you guys.
Take care, man.
Travel, stay home.
Just because someone else did it. If you did that for everybody, you'd be in a hard spot of trying to get deals done. And I think everybody, it's to me, every negotiation is very individualistic, and it's very unique to that person and to the timing and to the position and whatever it may be. So, no, I don't think we look at it like that. I think it's just every negotiation's its own being.
You look at the quarterback market, and it just keeps going further and further out there. Deshaun Watson's contract was, $230 guaranteed. I mean, do you have to obviously you have to pay attention to it because it sets markets with you. But how much does?
Yeah, I mean, it's an important part. I mean, there's an aspect that's important to that because you have to understand, right? You go to buy a house in a certain neighborhood, there's the cost of living, right, in that neighborhood. And so it's the same with football. Like every position, there's a market to it. There's a cost associated with being at different levels, within the quarterback group, within the receiver group, within the O-line group, whatever it is. And so market values are important to any negotiation, whether it's, again, no matter what the line of work is, right? That's going to be a part of it. So you have to know what they are. They always dictate what you do, not necessarily, but there are markers out there.
The first 2 days of free agency were pretty quiet for you guys. Are you confident it's going to work out? Are you getting nervous at that point? Or do you have a plan in play? What goes through your mind the first couple of days when things aren't happening? People are kind of, I'm sure you're on Twitter.
No, my friends sent me the memes of the Dave Ziegler with the clown face on, and they keep me, the guys I grew up with keep me in check with all that stuff. A guy sleeping at the wheel of the car and stuff like that. All good stuff. Nervous, no. I think with free agency. There's a level of, I think, patience and discipline that you have to have. You can get deals done as quick as you want to, depending on how high you want to go. And I think there's a level of discipline that you have to have about whether it's at a position or whether it's a specific player. Like how much are you going to allocate? And if you keep going and going and going, you can make that's how bad decisions can be made. And so, no, we weren't nervous. I think we were strategic in what we did. I think we had a plan to what we did, but at the same time, you have to be able to pivot, right? Because you are in on certain players, and then you get to a certain point where, whether it's from a monetary standpoint, you got to bail out, or that player decides to go somewhere else. You have to be ready to pivot. And I think that's the most important thing about free agency is you have a plan, like we talked about at the beginning, but you also have to recognize that you're going to have to be fluid, and you're going to have to, think on your toes to a degree and be flexible, and change your course of action if things don't pan out your way. So, no, we just kind of staying steady. There's a lot of players available. There's still, look at the market right now. There's still a lot of good players available in free agency. So I think patience is just a big part of it, and again, being fluid and flexible. And I think always have things to learn and always have things to improve at. And I think, but I thought we did a good job with that.
Is it hard to be patient? Obviously, your first year, you're fired up. You want to make some moves. Is it hard to kind of take a step back and wait for things to develop?
Yeah, you want to get deals done, and you want to add players. So, I would be lying if I said, you don't get anxious of wanting to do that. But at the same time, again, trained a certain way, seen it done for a long time a certain way. I've seen the benefits of being patient. And so, yeah, there's a human nature of wanting to get something done. But I think at the same time, you rely on in those times you rely on how you've been trained and what you believe in, and you kind of settle down and you get into your zone.
You've been pretty diligent at running back, linebacker, defensive line, cornerback, but from the outside looking in, it felt like the line would be a big priority for you guys based on how they played last year.
Yeah.
Is that just a case of things haven't worked out on certain players, or that maybe you feel like the answers are there on this roster?
Probably a combination of both. I think we have some. I think we have some talented players. I think we have some ascending young players on our team. We brought back Brandon Parker, who's another young player. We brought back Jermaine, who's a younger player. That both of those guys, or Jermaine specifically, has some position flex, and so we think we have some guys. We know we have some guys to build around. We know we have some guys that are ascending players. There was also, again, we talked about free agency, you're in all those markets pretty consistently, and there was offensive linemen that we were interested in, and again, there's a level of discipline, like I said, that you have to have, and some of those things, some of those opportunities went a different way, and so we pivoted, and we went a different way, and strengthened other parts of the team, and again, we feel like we have a good young core of guys there. We'll continue to build. There's a lot of opportunities between now and kickoff to improve the team, and we'll continue to look at all those avenues.
Like your friend sent you the memes or whatever for the first 2 days of free agency. You're gonna have to sit by the first 2 rounds of the draft. How strange is that going to be, or is that kind of a relief to know that you can just kind of sit back and wait for it to come? I know you could move back up in if you needed to.
Sure.
But what's that going to be like, do you think?
Yeah, on the surface right now, I think our first pick's in the 3rd round, and again, we'll see that's where we end up, or or we don't. But actually, I've had some experiences when I was in New England where we didn't have a 1st round pick. I think there was a couple years there where we didn't. There might have even been 1 year. There might even have been 1 year where we didn't have a 1st or a 2nd. I can't remember, but so I've experienced it. So the fact that I've experienced it won't make it as strange as maybe as if I had never experienced it. And so we'll just kind of let it. If that's where we end up and we're not picking to the 3rd round, then there's a little bit more time to continue to prepare, continue to kind of get organized. You'll see where things fall. You'll have a very clear picture of what's available and what's not. And I think we'll have a plan to execute at that point if that's the way it goes.
Do you have a board that reflects where you draft, or is it top 1 all the way down?
In terms of our
building your draft board?
Yeah, when you build it, you kind of you build it by position, right? And then there's an element of stacking the board vertically. There's an element of stacking it horizontally too, and so. Within that, you kind of have an idea of at least what our perspective is. Hey, these guys are 1st round, 2nd round, kind of all the different rounds. But that's our perspective and how we value them, which may be different, than how the other teams value him. So there's an element there. I mean, I think, it'd be like, there's all these mock drafts and things like that. People know like who some of the top players in the draft are, right? We'll study them all because I think it's important to know the whole board. To know what's at the bottom, you have to know what's at the top, right? And then there's just the professional development aspect also of like, especially, I'd say even more important now when you're a new scouting staff, to work through all those players, to have those types of discussions, to learn how different scouts see players, how I see players, and things like that. So there's definitely a professional development aspect with going through the draft process that's really important too.
I wanted to ask about your take on the cornerback guys there, because you talked about having a young core group. Some of those guys might figure into the plans, and then also would you want to bring in like a veteran presence at cornerback?
Yeah, I think we like you said, we've added some young players that we're really excited about. It hasn't been a focus, and to say like we need to add a veteran corner to the group, it just, I think we with that position we're excited with where we're at. If there was a veteran that became available that made sense, that we thought was going to help us win football games and improve that position, then that's something that we would look at. But to again, to answer your question specifically, it wasn't like a mindset of like, hey, we're young, let's add a more veteran presence. We're excited just that we have some talented young guys that we think can continue to get better more than anything else.
Going back to the Parker, when you guys did your self-scout and watching him from last year, clearly there are things you liked about him. What stood out when you watched Parker and his tape from the past?
Well, if you've seen him, he has very good size, very good length, which are two important attributes at the offensive tackle position. He's an athletic guy for his size, and he's a guy that I think can continue again. Like Brandon's not a finished product. He can continue to get better. He had a good experience of playing a lot of snaps last year, which there's a lot of learning that comes from that. And so, all those things were exciting. We're excited about with Brandon. Again, an ascending young player, good size, good length, athletic. Those are all good traits. To have a guy that's going to be playing, have an opportunity to compete for a job at the tackle position for us.
I know patience for every position is important, but on the offensive line, is that even more so maybe?
Yeah. I think with the offensive line, I think when you college football and how they play the game at the college level and what offensive linemen are asked to do, there's a lot of differences between that and the NFL game, just in terms of whether it's run schemes, whether it's pass schemes, whether it's spacing and splits. I mean, there's some similarities too, and it depends. It's team from team, but there's also a lot of differences. And so I think because of that, there's a lot of development that has to go into becoming an offensive lineman in the NFL. Right. It's just going to be different than what a lot of these guys are asked to do in college. And so there's definitely a development part of that. And then it's just such a technical position. You're talking about hand placement. You're talking about fits in the run game. You're talking about body positioning, steps, footwork in a confined space. Right. It's not like a receiver where it's like, that's important too, but you're running a route 10, 15, 20 yards down the field. There's a developmental aspect to that. This is close combat, and you have to be very precise and quick right off the jump. And so it's a tough position. And then there's the aspect of run calls, pass protection calls, adjustments, the front changes. Like there's a highly, I'd say, football IQ part of playing offensive line. Like, you have to be intelligent to do that job. And so that's a lot of different transitions, that you have to go through from going through college to the pros. And so it is a developmental, I think, position because of all those things.
With Alex Leatherwood, I think he played exclusively on the left side in college.
Right.
Then he moves to right tackle in the pros, then right guard. Or do you take that into account when you're watching him, that there's been a lot of transition for him over the last couple of years, not just even last year?
Yeah, I think you have to. I think, well, one, it's a valuable experience that he's went through because he's had the opportunity to play different positions, and again, you learn things from going through that. But yeah, when you're used to playing on one side and you move to the other side, that's another transition that you have to go through. And so again, Alex is a young, talented player. Got to play a lot of snaps last year, which was really valuable for him, and we're excited to work with him and kind of just let him carve out his path, and let him carve out what he does best, and then kind of see where it goes from there.
What's your reaction when you see other teams in your division like making all these moves? Everyone's kind of loading up this year. I mean, I'm sure it can influence what you're doing, but you can also. I mean, it's pretty remarkable. Like each team, the moves everybody's making in your division.
Yeah, if you're a fan of the AFC West, it's been exciting, right? No, it's exciting. I think from the fan perspective, I get it. I think it's exciting, and I think being in the NFL is highly competitive as is, and when in our conference, there's been a lot of talented players, high-profile players, I should say, right, that have been added, and again, that makes it. I guess that just kind of makes it even that much more exciting, and it's you're going to have to gear up week in and week out. Russell Wilson, talented player. The Chargers, I know, had added some talented players in free agency. J.C. Jackson, who we had in New England, and things like that. And so, yeah, it's exciting, and it just again, I don't know if it makes you any more focused, but like, do you take notice? Yeah, you take notice. The teams are getting better, and that's who you're competing against. So I think it's something you take notice of for sure.